So, Costas, great to have you on this episode of Leadership Bites. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me. It's my pleasure being here today.
Well, I keep saying the same thing because it seems to be consistently true, which is I'm really excited to have you on. So that's great. The day I don't say I'm excited, somebody's going to say, excuse me, Guy, you tell everybody else you're excited. What about me? But great to have you on. I obviously know who you are because I've put the invite to you, but just introduce yourself to the audience.
Of course. First of all, I'm delighted to be here. I'm equally excited to have this conversation with you today. I'm Costas Andriopoulos. I'm a professor of innovation and entrepreneurship at Base Business School, City, University of London. And I'm also the managing director of Avisos Advisors, which is innovation management consultancy. Abyssos is a Greek word for the abyss, and it's interesting that I use that word for my consultancy, but because it's about innovation, a lot of people find, for instance, the deepest, darker sides of the sea as frightening. But and the same analogy we can use for innovation, that it's frightening, it's dark. But what I'm doing with my clients is that I'm taking them to the journey, because I think that the darkness and something that is frightening, to me, it's inviting and it's alive. So in a way, what I do is that I work with companies as you do, or I work with some organization where they would like to actually learn more about the future. So they would like to see, the light at the end of the tunnel.
That's really interesting. And there are some, there's always that somebody says to me sometimes, how do you become when I talk about doing executive coaching, they go, well, where was the job advert for that? I go, well, there's not really an advert for it. What courses did you do for that? I go, well, it's not really quite as simple as that. So I would love to know, because it's not like being just a vet or a lawyer. How do you give us the journey and the path that brought you to where you are today before we get into some of the meaty topics around your book and around curiosity?
Of course. First of all, I'm Greek. That people can actually understand from the accent and the name. I was born in Athens some time ago, and I was always curious and I was very creative. So I studied business in terms of my first degree, and then in my PhD, I wanted to see how creativity is enhanced in the workplace. So what I've done was to actually do 3 cases in 3 reputable companies in the UK. So as an academic, I'm not doing experiments with students. I'm not doing surveys. I spend a lot of time on the field, which means that I'm researching companies, so I'm interviewing people involved, I'm observing them, and then I'm analyzing and synthesizing the data, and then I write my findings. So I've started with creative organizations in the UK, and I did my PhD, and I was awarded my doctorate, and then I said, what am I doing? What am I going to do next? And interestingly, if you look at the literature, creativity focuses on the generation of ideas, but it doesn't mean that the ideas will be executed. So I was more interested on the execution of the idea. So the second part of the formula, which was the innovation, how to turn these ideas into to the commercial reality, how to convert, for instance, ideas into products, services, processes, ideas. So what I did after my PhD was to start spending more time in a very nice place, which is called Silicon Valley in California, to see how people actually turn those ideas into products. And I was particularly interested to see how innovation happens under the gun, so where there is a lot of pressure from time and money. So I've studied new product design consultancies. So a lot of people think that the products that they buy are actually developed or designed by the companies. So, for instance, Apple designed its own products, which is the case now. But if you look back 20 years ago, they had people designing, for instance, the products. So I looked at those consultancies that were designing, that they are designing these products for large consumer players, electronics. And when I say under the gun, it means that the client comes and then they tell them you have 1 month, or you have 2 months, or you have 3 weeks because somebody else failed in the past, and you have to come up with those ideas. So I was very keen to see how innovation happens. And what I realized was that, first of all, it's tough, super tough. Secondly, it's very emotional. And thirdly, it's very disciplined, very structured. A lot of people think about creativity, they think about innovation, and they are still, with the Archimedes Eureka, for instance, principle. I will be on a shower, and then the ideas will come to me. This is rarely the case. So it's very, very structured. So there is a lot of collecting of information. There is a lot of research. Then there is a lot of teamwork. There are a lot of experimentations. There are a lot of prototypes. And then, they present this to the clients. And then the client says, I love those kind of things. Can you work more on this? Or I don't like, those kind of things. Let's get rid of them. Or I like the solution, the other solution. Can you actually integrate this? So I was very keen to see, what happens and how it happens. And therefore, I was curious, but I was spending a lot of time in Silicon Valley, and especially in the summer, because during the other terms I was teaching. So I was spending a lot of my summers for years in that particular area of the world, and I was enjoying it because I was learning, because I was actually seeing what is the difference between what people do there and what people do in other parts of the world. So for me, it was an interesting journey, and I, reflecting on this whole experience, I think that this is like the internet, right? So one link leads you to the next one, to the next one, to the next one. But what is the difference of what I do is that I don't fly so quickly from the one to the other one. I stay with something for years. So, which is something that, of course, comes with academia, but of course, it's also something that I also like, because I would like to be rigorous. So I would like to spend years researching something. I would like to be certain that what I identify is not actually something that I have seen in one company. So to go back to that example, I have spent 4 years collecting, and I have done 7 companies. And so I would like this discipline, this rigor that comes with academia. Of course, you cannot publish things immediately, but when you are, for instance, doing for that project, I did around 120 interviews, and I've spent months collecting this. And I've looked on the internet, and I've looked at their, for instance, internal material, internal records. There is a lot of work, but the insights that you come up with are super, super interesting. First of all, for academia, but also for practice.
So I'm very interested in how you approach companies actually with that kind of request to come and observe and maybe see things that they can't see, and what are the rules of the game with that, in terms of obviously there's confidentiality, but so how does that approach happen, and what's the comfort zone with what Costas might come up with and what he might discover?
That's a great question. I love the question. And I have done loads of cases, loads of interviews, loads of months of observation. So what I require from companies is a lot of things. So and it needs to start non-threatening. So in a way, an academic comes and it's not like a consultant. They're not competitors. So they're coming to actually understand how things work in an organization. A lot of companies are flattered when you are asking them about this kind of thing. So they want to see they want to show, for instance, to the world how things are done. And what they don't realize when they sign with me, they sign up for this project, and when I have to sign the NDA, which I do, is that the amount of work required. So my project in terms of the US, people were very, very generous with their time. They were very generous, for instance, with internal material, with their employees, with the products that they have developed. So you require a particular level of access that you have to negotiate with time. So you have to build a rapport and trust. So I'm not saying anything groundbreaking here. So it's about building rapport and trust. It's about making sure that you will actually share all the information before you publish it, and that all people involved are happy with this. And by spending time on the field for some time, then you build a reputation. And your reputation has to be stellar in terms of how you, for instance, record the information, how you store the information. Even storing the information is important, right? So where do you have it? I mean, can people have access to it? Because it's not like you're asking them a lot of confidential questions, but there are a lot of things which are personal. So a lot of times you're asking them about their experience in an organization, how teamwork does happen, what the leadership looks like, who are the legends in a firm, who the myths. So there are all these kind of things which are very personal. So you are trying in a way to make all these things anonymous. You are very sure that all these things are stored in a professional, for instance, facility. They're safe, etc., etc. Because what we have to realize that what we were talking was something that most probably have happened 20 years ago. There were no smartphones, right? Now a lot of people record their interviews on a smartphone. At that point, it was cassettes, right, or mini cassettes. So you have to be very clear that everything is done properly. So trust is important. Also, this company is gaining something from you. It's also important. So they will ask you. So we don't want to know who you are talking about, but how are we comparing with other companies? What are we doing differently? What are we good at doing? What are we need to improve? So what do we need to improve? So there are these kinds of interactions that build the rapport, and then while you're spending more time with them, they give you more access without them or you realizing. So you're becoming a trusted partner.
So this work went into a book called Purposeful Curiosity, which I believe is just being launched literally now, if I've understood that correctly.
Yes, the similar, for instance, principles have been adopted for this project. I've started researching this topic, I believe, six years ago. I talked to around 60 individuals from different parts of the world, from different walks of life. So I have people who have companies in Japan, to people who have companies in Silicon Valley. I have also talked to individuals like, for instance, opera singers, chefs. So sometimes it's about them, sometimes it's about their team, sometimes it's about their organization. But I was curious to see how they pursue a passion for a longer period of time and how curiosity is helping them. Because what I've seen, especially nowadays, and I wanted to interview people now, because I could have done, for instance, archival research. I could have gone 50 years ago or 60 years ago and see, how a lot of interesting inventions were done and how people use their curiosity to reach their destinations. But this wasn't the case because I wanted to see how people can become curious now. Why do I feel that this is different from the past? Because now we live in an era, first of all, where there is information overload. We have so access to so much information. And secondly, we are bombarded by distractions, notifications. So it's very difficult to sit down and focus on something. So I wanted to figure out how people actually stay with their curiosity longer. And I wanted to see how people can become more intentional with the curiosity, because we are curious when we go to Google. We are curious when we go to Chat GPT and we ask them things about our industry, about ourselves. So what does Chat GPT know about me? So this was something, this was the first thing that I wanted to figure out. What does it say? I mean, is it accurate? Is it inaccurate? So we go from one to the next, to the next, to the next. I wanted to see how people can actually channel the curiosity to a particular purpose, how they can become more intentional with their curiosity. So this is something that triggered the project. And of course, when we are curious about something, what we have to realize is that we are also curious about ourselves. So the project is just a way to figure out more about us. Why did I start my project? Because I'm extremely curious. Actually, most of my friends and my colleagues refer to me as annoying, because although I'm growing older, yes, this is true, right? This is not a joke. This is true. Because a lot of people are telling me, you just turned 50. You have questions as you used to have when you were 10. There's something wrong with you. So there is this association with asking questions in age, right? So we shouldn't be asking questions as we are growing older, right? We should know things, which I think this is the biggest myth, or this is the biggest mistake that people do, teams do, organizations do, that they think that they know everything. But in reality, we don't. Why? Because things change so much and so quickly that we have to ask new questions. So, and I will finish with that because I know that you have a question. So, because I'm working with a lot of entrepreneurs get obsessed with their products, which is wrong. They have to get obsessed with questions and new questions, because consumers change, events trigger, things to change. So they have to figure out which are the new questions that can give me new clients, that can give me new products. This is the thinking that we need to have.
There's so many things I can talk about from this. It's fantastic. You reminded me of something, which is I was looking at my son a few years ago. I've got a 10-year-old and an 8-year-old, and at one point he was looking at some shoes on his feet, and he was picking them up, and they were a bit heavier than normal. Right, and he was and he had at least 5 minutes of just curiosity around his new shoes, the weight on his feet, and he was fascinated by it, and he was looking up, and I was thinking, do you know what? That's the thing to hold on to, isn't it? That curiosity and that kind of childlike, but you're not being a child, but it is, you can really see people that want to understand. And I have a kind of a little bit of it's a joke, but it's a setting a tone that when I do leadership development with clients, I go, curiosity is not sabotage.
Yes.
Which is, it's okay. If you're trying to sabotage the session, then we're going to have a completely different conversation. But curiosity is not sabotage. I will not take in fact, if you really want to show me you're paying attention, poke it, ask questions, see if it breaks, etc. So what you're saying, I find on a personal level super exciting because it resonates. And I'd like to talk about a phrase that I've picked up reading around your topic and well, from yourself, which is, everybody kind of knows what the word curiosity means per se, but hyper curiosity. Yeah. So bring that to life. What is hyper curiosity?
People have it, kids have it, first of all. You're absolutely right about your son. We all have it, right? So we're all super curious about our environments. If they take us to different parts of the world, we're very keen to explore. But as we're growing older, this curiosity is drained. And the usual suspect is education. So a lot of times the teachers ask hundreds of questions per day. So the kids learn not to ask, but to respond, which I think it's a very difficult thing to have, right? And in my view, a very dangerous thing to have. So then they go to university, things get much worse, right? So because I'm teaching I don't teach undergrads. I teach one course in masters, which are around their 20s. But normally, my students, because I teach on our MBA program, it's around 30, 40 to 50, right? So these are very different age groups. And what I'm always telling them is, when you come to the class, come with questions. It's not the stigma to ask questions. It's not the stigma to be hyper curious about things. On the contrary, when you go back to business, you need, for instance, to encourage your employees to ask questions. Because asking a question is the first way to find an answer. To me, it's not about asking a question. It's about having a focused question to find an answer. So people have to find answers, right? But the first thing is to have a question. So when I was at Cardiff University before joining City, I used to run a department. And then I did an experiment once. So normally when you run a department, you have as it happens in the real world, also in academia, you have every 3 months you have a meeting where you discuss. So I was having an agenda. Most of the times when you have an agenda with statement, people don't get excited, they don't engage. Then one day I turned those statements to questions. I said, do you know how much money we spent? Do you know how many students we have? So I turned every statement that I have into questions. You cannot imagine the level of engagement. So first of all, everybody attended. Everybody came, and everybody already had an answer or a guess. So immediately, by turning a statement to a question, sparks curiosity, makes people curious. So it's nice to be curious. It's nice to be hyper curious. What I'm saying in the book, that the problem is that you have to stay, though, with your curiosity for a longer period of time. What I'm doing and what I notice my students doing, what my daughter does, what everybody does at the moment, is that we move from one topic to the other one, but without digging deeper. So we go for breadth rather than depth. So what I'm always saying is that if there is something that you're really passionate about, if there is something that is your purpose, spend longer than you will normally do. So spend more time, spend weeks, spend months. It doesn't matter. This is a great thing. And what I notice is that when people do it, first of all, interesting answers, interesting insights are generated, but people are extremely happy and energetic with what they are coming up with. as well as with the process. So to me, it's about constantly asking questions, but with a way or with a focus to constantly finding answers.
This gives me a sense of the word psychological safety kind of jumped into my mind, which is the intellectualization of being curious. It's like when leaders say, yes, I have an open door policy, until you actually try and speak to them. So it's great if it exists, but it's damaging if you say it exists and it doesn't.
Yes.
So what is the environment, the culture, the thinking, whatever it might be, that says, actually, if you want curiosity, then this is what has to be in place to allow it to exist and manifest and thrive?
First of all, it's a culture that has, or a work environment that focuses a lot on creating people and teams which are open-minded and humble. So, for instance, when I start teaching or when I facilitate a session, when I work with clients as you do, I have a disclaimer. I say, I don't know everything, right? But I'm very curious to find out stuff. So I have questions. If you said that from the beginning, and then people get into the questioning mode, then get to the humility mode, that we don't know those kind of things. The moment, the time, the minute that you're saying you have a question, it means that you don't know something. Immediately, you are becoming somebody who is open-minded. Immediately, you are becoming somebody who is humble. Because you're asking, you're looking for this information. When I went to Silicon Valley, I was looking to figure out what people do, right? I didn't have something in my mind. I didn't have a hypothesis to be tested. Does this thing exist there? Yes, no, no. I wanted to figure out how people do it, right? And when you go to the field and you're saying, or when you run a meeting and you're saying, how can we improve? How can we do those kind of things? Then people realize that in that particular environment, in that particular instance, they can open up. So everybody's open, everybody is humble, and everybody's looking to find the solution. That nobody has one solution, right? So there isn't such a thing as one solution or one answer. We're exploring things here. So humility and open-mindedness is the environment that you want to create in your organization or in your team. Of course, in order to do so, it needs to start from the top, as you know. So you have to role model this. Because if you're saying, oh, yes, we're all about questioning, we are all about being open-minded, we are all about humility, and you come across as arrogant, not asking questions, you understand where I'm going with this, etc., then this is something that will not go down well. So leaders, either in teams, leaders in organizations, facilitators or in workshops, academics in the classes, uh, they have to set the right tone. When I set the tone, you cannot imagine the questions that the class asks. It's unbelievable. And to be honest with you, sometimes it's tiring, right? So I used to teach, for instance, undergrads. When you go to teach undergrads and you have 200 in the room or 300, it's what I say one way of communication. I was joking to my colleagues and saying this is propaganda style of teaching, right? There is no way that there can be an interaction. But as far as I'm concerned, my colleagues may have different views. It's easier because it's controlled by you. Now, if you are creating an interactive, for instance, environment, and this happens a lot in organizations, there is no safety net, right? Anything goes. So you don't know what kind of questions they will be asking. You don't know what kind of answers they will be giving. Anything goes. So there has to be, what you were saying earlier, a safety net for people to feel that they can ask, for people to feel that they can answer, for people to actually say, oh, well, that answer actually sparked another question. I think we are our era is very trigger happy. We need to come up with the answer very quickly. And because things are moving so fast. And yes, I'm not against it. Sometimes we may. But I don't think that it's always the case. I think that we are exaggerating. We're saying, yeah, we need to find a solution today. Because otherwise, we may be considered from our competitors or from other teams as weak. There is nothing weak about searching it. There is nothing weak about spending more time with the problem. And this is something that I see people doing nowadays. They are curious, right? They are scrolling on social media or they are on the internet, but the curiosity doesn't convert into something. So there is a lot of waste. So that's why I looked at people who converted their curiosity to a product, to music, to, for instance, to food. So there is curiosity that has an outcome. This is what I'm interested in. So how can we turn people to become more curious with an outcome? Because there is a lot of input. There is no excuse if people say, yeah, I didn't have knowledge. No, everything. We live in a very interesting era because we have knowledge about the past and the present and what happens to different parts of the world. So there is a lot of input that can lead us to some interesting, let's say, insights or outcomes.
So something about curiosity with the intent to have an output is different to what one might call idle curiosity, I guess. When it comes to, I spend all of my time virtually in organizations who I think there's a great phrase which is bewitched by their own agenda. They are, to a greater or lesser degree, on either a hamster wheel of repetition, or they're on a sprint to get something done, which is because something's gone wrong or it's a timeline of their own making. So I almost have this thought around having almost two horses in the race. There's that short term, maybe mid-term, and there's that mid to long.
Yep.
And I wonder what you see when it comes to an organization's capacity to balance the solving the issue in the now and their capacity to what we would class as event horizon thinking, to think beyond, to a place which actually requires a lot of maturity as opposed to dealing just in a reactive way. So how do the good ones do it?
Yes, fantastic question, and this is where I spent most of my academic research on. The two horizons that you're talking, the present and the future. And it's not very easy because the present is certain and people focus on efficiencies. How can I make more back from what I already have there, right? So it's safe, for instance, no risks, and people go home, they feel excited because what they do is they grow the revenues, right? But it doesn't mean that they will have revenues in the future because something new may come and they may lose this wave. Now, so that's one extreme. The other extreme is that you are always thinking about the future. You are always in the R&D mentality. You never launch something. You never have revenues. You are always broke, right? So these are the two extremes. So I see them as a continuum. Individuals, teams, and organizations need not only to choose either or, but they have to do both. For instance, Apple is a great example, and my students hate when I use Apple example because they're saying there is another company that does this. But I'm saying, yes, there are, but a lot of people can relate to this. So Apple does this, which means, for instance, the computers were the present. But when they started working on the App Store, on the iPad, on the movies, now on the services, that's the new thing for them. So in a way, they have money that they create from the present and they reinvest this money into the future. The future at one point becomes the present. So it's like a virtuous loop, virtuous cycle that never ends. Now, a lot of companies, they do it in extremes. They either focus so much on the present or the future because it requires a different mindset that I was saying. The present is more about efficiency, not taking risk. The future is about taking risks and it's about experimentation. Now, the companies that I have studied, they have a couple of, let's say, idiosyncrasies. The first one is some of them have two CEOs, co-CEOs. So the one CEO was focusing on the present, the other CEO was focusing on the future. So that's a very interesting structure if you think about it, structurally and culturally. Because the one always talks about, okay, lovely people, what do we have in terms of this month? The other person also talks about lovely people, what do we have in terms of 6 months ahead, 1 year ahead? What is the R&D? Right? And of course, the other thing that we shouldn't forget about the example that I'm using is consultancies. This is B2B. So B2B is a relationship based on trust. A lot of clients stay with you if they think that you know where this world is going to. You know the future, You are preparing for the future, and you will help them in terms of their needs in the future. So there is this kind of mentality that exists. So that's one thing. The second thing that I've seen doing was the following. So they were saying some employees they have to actually be focused on developing or designing this particular product. Let's use a category as an example: keyboards. A new keyboard, a new monitor. If you give the designer a new keyboard or a new monitor, it's hell, because they have done most probably other 3 or 4 in the past. There is nothing unique, there is nothing interesting, but then this is the bread and butter. They can do it very quickly, so they make their fees very quickly. But the company does something very differently from other companies. They say, for the designer who has done this project, which wasn't very satisfying, the next project that they will be doing will be more exploratory. So we will involve them with something that has to do in terms of the future. So they try to give a balance. So sometimes is the leadership, sometimes it's projects, sometimes it's people. So when I'm saying project, it can be in different, let's say, locations. So one location does more the present, the other location does more the future. Or it can be employees. An employee 1 month does something that they know quite well, and they can become very efficient. In the other month, they do something that they will innovate, they will use their imagination, their creativity, they will experiment, they will be happy. So there has to be a balance in what we're discussing. I will use myself now as an example. I'm known in terms of innovation, and especially radical innovation. This is my expertise, not incremental. So, for instance, the first iPod or the iPad was radical, but the other, for instance, versions of the iPad or the iPod are incremental. So, more interested in how companies develop these radical products. So, I have written a lot about this. I have thought about this. I have a textbook that focuses a lot on this. Then at one point I said, I think I had enough. I want to think about the future. The future for me was curiosity. Curiosity came from this project. All these people were extremely curious about the present, extremely curious about the future. All my colleagues, 100%, they told me one thing: you are crazy. One thing: you are crazy to actually live something that you know. You can be efficient, you can make money, because we make money through executive education, through consulting, etc., and start something from scratch. There is opportunity cost. It will take time, it will cost you a fortune, and they are right. So if you think about all those things, they are right. It took me 6 years. It cost me personal money, so because you have to do other things, but the satisfaction and the insights that I have developed, there wouldn't be a way that I could have developed if I was staying in the same field. So to me, it didn't also give me the energy, but it also helped me to see what I'm currently doing from a different angle.
As an individual, are there any guidelines from you that would say to be purposeful, to have discipline, to have rigor, it's not just as simple as, what I would class as maybe magpie curiosity. Oh, that's
Yes.
shiny.
Yes.
And maybe that's the first point of interest that you have about anything. It attracts you.
Yes.
But what is it that actually enables rigor and discipline?
That's a great question, and I have started this project because I also suffer from this, right? I have a lot of interest. I like design, I like architecture, I love movies, I like music, and as you can imagine, a lot of the curiosity that I was saying earlier that it get wasted, I'm also saying it that I do, right? I also waste in terms of my curiosity. Then at one point I said, I want to become curious about curiosity, right? And I want to spend a long period of time, and I have to sustain this because this is not me. So I'm not somebody who can actually spend 5 years of their lives doing this. So I said, if it works for me, most probably it will work for other people. So what I did was I said, I'm very passionate about this. Since I was a child, I was curious. My teachers actually said this. My classmates were saying this. My parents, I'm actually grateful to my parents because my parents actually encouraged me to be curious. and I was the ultimate distractor. I was destroying a lot of things, right? Because I wanted to see how they work. So, to be honest with you, there aren't a lot of toys that survive my hands, right? Because my friend was a screwdriver, right? When my parents were coming to my bedroom, they were saying, "Okay, you are great, you are very creative, but there is nothing working." And at points they were right, but then I could put them back, I could reassemble them. So I was very good with my hands, but I wanted to see how they work. So they never said we will stop giving you pocket money, right? They were always encouraging me to actually go deeper in terms of my curiosity. So I had this as a child, but then I lost and I said, what is the way? I'll tell you something interesting. This became my purpose. And by making the project my purpose, everything else magically disappeared. When I'm saying everything else, the other interests that I have, notifications, distractions, magically disappeared. I was so immersed into what I was doing, so I lost track of time and place, that the only thing that I can think and the only thing that actually grabbed my attention was my project, which was in front of me. So when you're researching something, as you do, you're a consultant, so you have to research and you have written books, so you have to write things. It's quite tough, right? Because you spend a lot of time on your own and somewhere away from everybody else. This is what I found extremely difficult at the beginning. I was on my own, thinking, researching, writing. But then I was so immersed into this that I was starting to write. I'm an early bird, so I started writing around 5 o'clock. And then I was finishing around 12 o'clock, and I wouldn't realize that, and I didn't ever realize that 7 hours have passed, right? So it was an immersion. The moment that I was finishing, everything else magically reappeared, was reappearing, everything else, right? But during those 5, 6, 7 hours, for those, especially for the 2 years that I have been writing a book, was magical. It disappeared. So it was something which was very close to me. It was very personal. It was very emotional. And it meant something to me. So the moment that something turns to a purpose, the moment that something turns to something which is very emotional, something that we care about, there is a high likelihood that we forget about everything else. So what we have to do, which goes back to the beginning of our conversation, is to be curious about our purpose. What makes us tick? All right. So we spend a lot of times in our lives, we spend a lot of times in our careers on things that it's not for us, and then we're saying, why am I not performing? Why am I not producing? Why am I not happy? But it goes back to this fundamental thing: what am I curious about? Right? What is the thing that I can become more curious about? What is my purpose? We have to be curious about our purpose.
There's quite a lot going on there, which I'm quite interested in, and there's definitely something around having an emotional response to a thing, because without an emotional response, it's an intellectual endeavor, and I don't know how long that can sustain somebody.
Yep.
Without something inside that is driving you.
Yep.
There's probably, nobody that achieved anything truly amazing probably didn't have a level of obsession in what they're doing. I mean, everybody that I look to that has achieved great things, they were not always the easiest person, and they were very often, look at anybody in sports and etc. There's a level of emotional connection to it. There's a level of obsession around it. So you don't necessarily have to be an obsessive. We don't all have to be the Olympic level of our thing, but there is something about having a level of an element of compulsion, and maybe if it's not pulling you, then maybe you haven't found it, or you're holding fears. And so I do hear that. I might be curious about it, I might care about it, but do I have to have a purpose at the start as how it's going to manifest in reality as an output? Or actually, do I just allow myself to be curious, and what it will turn into will manifest in due course? Can both things be true?
Yeah, I first of all, I love what you're saying, and I totally agree. And what you said is very insightful. First of all, it's about obsession. The second one is about, can I figure it out, throughout the journey, or do I need to know in advance? So there are a lot of points there. Let me take it from the end, and then I will go back to the obsession thing. Yes, some people are starting these projects, these journeys. I'm referring to this as journeys in the book because they're curious about something. Others find their purpose in the journey. So maybe they have different journeys, different interests, and then they're saying, but this one, path A is more interesting to me. Emotionally feel more attached to is that path B, for instance. So it happens. The other thing that we have to realize is that while you are on the journey, um, you're becoming more knowledgeable. So it means that you're scratching your itch, but you are learning. So the important thing is, and this is something that we normally do, right? Human beings normally do that. When they scratch an itch and they find a solution, they stop, they shut down. So to carry on in the journey is equally difficult. So what makes you to continue in this journey? So sometimes it's more about yourself. So you see things about yourself. While I was researching this, for instance, in some of the interviewees quotes, I saw myself. So in others, no, they were totally new to me. So you get deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper into what you're researching without realizing it. And of course, it can be satisfactory, it can be rewarding because you're learning, you're talking to people, but it can also be problematic because you hit walls, right? So sometimes things don't work out. Maybe you don't get the interviewee, maybe the interviewee doesn't talk. It has happened to me in the past. So this level of purpose keeps you motivated. That despite this, I want to figure out setbacks actually make you more curious than winning, because you're saying, okay, I didn't manage to achieve this. What happened there? So you become more curious about figuring out the solution. When you're winning, you tap, you're saying you're great, blah blah blah, and then you carry on. There is no learning. So in my book, I'm saying that curiosity is quite good, especially if you have setbacks, because then you become, to link it with the first part of your presentation. Then of your question. Then you become obsessed to figure out the solution. Then you become a little bit addicted. So why this thing didn't work? So what can I find here? So I think, I believe that it's important to take it as we are progressing and to not have a predefined image of what is the right thing. Because this is, our society comes with predefined images. Another thing that I'm saying in the book, you have a project that you want to research, you have an area that you want to study. A lot of people are waiting for permission. Permission comes either from their line managers, from the heads of faculty, in our case in academia. But this is wrong, right? This is completely wrong. As long as it's related to what you're doing, as long as you are fulfilling, for instance, the obligations that you have against, the community or against, the organization, you shouldn't be asking for permission. But we live in an era where there is a lot of asking for permission. So it is extremely important for us to go ahead with what we want to research and to go down the rabbit hole and see where this takes us. I think this is the most important thing.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting thing for me, where if an organization is demanding innovation and not creating time for it, then that's something different to the individual's personal drive that says, actually, if you really do have a connection to it and it does fire you up and it is an itch you can't scratch, you won't look for permission. You're not doing anything covert. You'll get up a little bit earlier. You'll read and research in your breaks. You'll spend some time in the evening because it's something you want to do. So actually, it's not so much that you're not seeking permission. You don't require permission.
Yeah.
And I think that's very important, that I do have a sense that this is about the individual's sense of, this is what I want to do and this is what I need to do. And actually what actually have to be able to do is to give myself a challenge, which is, am I lazy? Am I, well, if they make time for me, I'll do it. Well, then it's not, this isn't really curious, is it? It's just, it's something else. But if you've got to know, if you want to see how that could work or pan out or could be done differently, then the reality is you'll find a way to do it. And I think that's very clear. And I wonder, in the people that you have interviewed and spoken to, how many of them sought permissions, or how many of them decided, hey, this is my path?
None of them asks for permission, or none of them requires to ask for permission, right? And what we have to realize, which is very close to creativity as well, is that there has to be a little bit of misbehaving. To me, entrepreneurship, creativity, curiosity are closely linked to misbehaving. Closely, right? Because if we're always following what people are telling us, then we will never innovate, we will never be creative, we will never be curious. So in a way, what do you have to say? Yes, I'm hearing you, but there is always a but I would like to search for this, or give me a week, or give me some days, or give me a month, or give me a budget. So that's a thing which I think is extremely important. There is an element of not listening. There is an element of seeing how things are with the path that we are going to take. But this is a risky path, because this is not the tried and tested. So these people is not only that they're sort of, in quotes, misbehaving, but they're also taking some risks. And our society is not in favor of risks. But historically, if we look at, for instance, movements, inventions, innovations, they start because some people said, most probably we have been looking at this in a very wrong manner, and we have to look at this from a different angle, from a different lens, right? And they're trying to see what is the lens that they can find. So they become curious about this lens, and how this lens can actually enlighten us and reach, for instance, the pool of potential solutions. So I think the important thing here is that they have to allow themselves to explore, and the organization also has to allow a little bit of slack there. Because if you're always 100%, 3M, for instance, they have innovated in terms of sandpaper, then they did the Post-it notes. At one point, they had this 20% rule that individuals could do whatever they want, related to what the company does, but not related to the task, basically, right? And you could see a lot of innovation. So the point here is that the more you give, the more you will get back. And there are a lot of people who want to take. When I'm saying people, leaders, project managers, the moment that you give more, it's very likely that people will appreciate this, will respect this, and they will like to give something back. I'm not saying that this is a bulletproof strategy. There are problems with this one. Some people, for instance, abuse those kinds of policies, values, or systems. And that's why some companies have to stop them. But there is this kind of idea that the more you give, the more people will be more creative, more innovative, more curious about things, and this will actually make them better in their lives, in their careers, happy. They will transfer this information or exchange this information that they have gained with other people in their organization or in the teams. So there are a lot of benefits there.
I am fascinated by the need to control versus the requirement for the health of an organization to have people that are, well, I'm going to say to some point, sometimes misfits. And I don't mean that everybody is a misfit, but I think it's fascinating that it's for example, like expenses policies and things like that. There's always going to be, just like in every profession, there are people that are doing things that are illegal. It doesn't matter if you're a doctor, a baker, there's a distribution curve, and some people are going to be doing bad things. Right. Yeah. So every organization has got people that will abuse the rules, but actually they should be dealt with by exception, as opposed to creating almost a level of tolerance that is set so low that it depresses people's will or innovation or sense of capacity to have an opinion and be curious. I think there's a lot that goes in there into almost the cultural design of what the environment tolerates and has a tolerance for, which is probably a whole separate podcast. So I'm super alert to time. These are conversations that, and I keep saying this, but you're lucky I don't live just down the road, because I'd be at your house every day and you'd be going, Guy, I'm afraid I only expected to do an hour on a podcast, not for you to move in and keep asking me questions. So
no, I love it.
So I can definitely keep going. However, I would just like to express that this is a huge topic, I think, that goes into not just an idea of, isn't curiosity important? Well, who's going to disagree? But actually having the systems and the mindsets and the thinking that goes to the personal discipline and rigor of an individual to apply it, but also the ability of an organization to find the capacity for it.
Yeah.
Which I think is very clear. So if people wanted to get the book, they would go to Amazon, I'm guessing, and they would look for Purposeful Curiosity?
Correct. Yes.
Okay,
They will go. Yes, they will go to Amazon or the other online retailers, and they will get the book. One of the final things that I want to say is that, and this was the dream researching this, and of course writing the book, is to start a movement around this. To start a movement which is, don't only limit yourself scratching the surface of your itch, to create a project around your itch. Open a folder, start collecting. And this is what I always say. I have a daughter who is she's going to be 18 at the end of this month. She's going to university next year. So I'm always telling her, have a project about this. Learn as much as you can. Get the resources, distill the resources, triangulate, see whether there is something wrong there. It helps in terms of keeping our brains and our energies and our emotions alive, and at the same time we learn from it. So, and then we can share this. So it's nice to have it as a project in a family. It's nice to talk about this. Sometimes when I have a dinner where I'm asking you, so what grabbed your attention today? What was interesting today? So there has to be this conversation, and of course, a final point. This has to also go back to the corporate world, right? A lot of people are talking about, as you were saying earlier, short term, what can we do? But they rarely explore the future. So they rarely think about, or they are curious about what the future will be. And one of the things that COVID taught us was that there are a lot of unexpected events that can happen, and that we have to be very quickly inquisitive about ways to solving them. So the companies that survive and actually thrive were the companies that said, okay, this is the situation now, so what can we do? And they started talking about, there were other companies that paralyzed. They didn't have this mindset of exploring, of discovering, of this mindset of being open-minded, humble, inquisitive, to think about the future. So I think sometimes the crisis teaches us that, and I think some other times the opportunities. So people are talking about now chat GPT and AI, about the metaverse. So companies, organizations, individual teams have to be, for instance, curious about what the future is, and start seeing how they can develop a project so that they can be prepared when this thing actually becomes alive.
And this is, I was sort of bringing this to a close, but I'll reopen again with, I'm slightly fascinated by people that have locked into a set frame of reference that has stayed with them for a certain amount of time, which is to say WhatsApp came out and they don't use WhatsApp, which is not a problem. Chat GPT. There's a lot of people that if you said that, they just wouldn't know what it is. And even if they knew what it is, have they been on? Because I've been playing with it like I've been going, wow, this is actually frighteningly effective. And I think there is something around, it is very easy for people to get into, they could call it a flow, but I would call it maybe a steady state which is
Yeah.
maybe only one step away from being in a rut. So there's an interesting bit of vocabulary. If you're being kind to yourself, you might call it this, but actually it might be something else. And, you know, who am I to say when it's I had you on the podcast? But I think there is something that if you know you're curious, then this is a fascinating episode. If you want to be more curious, I just think every time you come across something you don't know what it is, go and have a look at it.
Yep.
If you don't have TikTok, go on TikTok.
Yep.
I've heard TikTok's this. Yeah, but have you been on it? No, it's not just dancing people anymore. There's lots of stuff on there. So go and have a look. ChatGPT, go and have a look. So I think that's just it, isn't it? Just if you're already in that mindset, this is great. But if you're not, just start almost what I call being a woodpecker. Peck at it.
I love it.
And just have a look, and then something will, in a 12-month period, something will make you go, ooh. And when you get the ooh, then start to follow it. And I think I'm hearing that in what you're saying, and that's fantastic.
But that's the whole idea, that we have to stay with something longer in order to reach the depth that we require. Innovation comes by staying somewhere longer than everybody else, right? And it's interesting, when we were having these conversations, when people had some glimpses in terms of the book, they're coming back and they are telling me, you know, I always wanted to research this. So it's like by reading something or hearing, for instance, this podcast, people were saying, yes, what Guy and Costas were talking about. I was always so interested about this. It's like giving them a permission. It's like normalize, making, you know, the searching or the being, going to the discovery mode, making this normal. And if that is the impact that we have, why not? That's a great impact.
I do think you should get a T-shirt made, which is innovation is staying curious longer than somebody else.
I love it. Yes.
I think that's you should trademark that.
I will try, and if I do any sales, I will send you the royalties for every T-shirt that I sell. That was your idea. So,
well, if you don't do it in the next few months, I might do it. Anyway, so listen, I'm going to bring us to a close. I'd like to stay on just for a few moments to make sure everything's uploaded. So, Costas, from me and from those that are listening, you've been an absolute joy, very succinct, very clear about your thoughts, full of energy, and it's very, very appealing. So thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. I had a great time. Likewise, the energy from you was great, and I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much for having me.